to Free Practice Fridays with Freya, where somehow you're getting a second go, James, even though I had threatened that Tommy would join me this week. Decided to give you another shot.
To be fair, I haven't seen an invitation to him, so I can only assume that you just didn't ask. You don't ask, you don't get. And if anyone who knows Tommy T well will know that you need a good 4 or 5 month lead time to book him in for anything to give him enough time to respond to a message. So, and I know he's listening to this, so hi Tommy, reply to my messages.
Hi Tommy, if you could respond to anyone, that would be great. No, you're very correct in saying that there was no invitation issued, just because life got in the way. So yes, you live another day, James.
I love running on default invitations. That's my favourite.
I know, it's just full of respect, right? So I thought we would change things up this week, and as much as this is Freya's Free Practice Friday, and to be clear, I will take over at any point that I choose, you can ask me the questions. How does that sound?
Yes, good. Also, thank you for the good prep time that I had this morning to think about interviewing you. But yes, okay, well, welcome to Freya's Friday, F1 Fridays with me, James. Doesn't quite have the same ring to it, does it? It's interesting because I got in trouble last week for taking over the podcast, and now I'm being asked to take over the podcast. Who knows what's going on?
Careful
Certainly
what you
me.
wish for, even if it is subconscious wishing. I know that you just need to come and get your sticky fingers on this podcast, and then you can hand it back over again. So
context is important. Look, what I actually thought it would be good to do is hello to many of your friends who listen to this podcast now exclusively only the Friday one and not the main one because of reasons that we can all imagine it correct. So what I thought I would do is for the rest of our listeners, ask you some questions, give you a bit of context to who the F Freya is. I couldn't be bothered editing myself out. Yeah, well, is anyone who would work at Apple would know we'll all learn together. Look, what I want to do is actually go back to your sports early life, though, because I know a bit about your story in terms of your sports background, but obviously no one else really does listen to this podcast aside from your friends. So to really sum up what you are about now, let's go right back to your beginnings. So talk to me about your sports background. What did young, and I can only imagine highly competitive Freya, do for sport?
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not a competitive person in the slightest.
Well, that's the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Do better research when you interview people, James. Look, I am quite a competitive person. Sport for me was a funny one because I was quite influenced by my siblings, I would say. I think my parents still look at those of us who are quite sporty and kind of can't figure out where it comes from because, we didn't grow up watching footy or, Formula One or anything really. We weren't really particularly sporting family. But my brother got into sport. He played rugby and he was a rower and was also quite a good kind of athletics guy in his day. And then one of my other sisters was a rower as well, and she also did gymnastics and hurdles and all sorts of things. And I kind of came along, and I think as many people who are the youngest of many siblings probably can relate to, you spend a lot of time being kind of dragged around to everybody else's sport. And so you then go, okay, well, I know a bit about rowing, I know a bit about hurdles and these other kind of things, so I'll just do that too. So I kind of fell into a few sports, I would say, rowing being one of them. And I think by the time I kind of finished school, there were 3 big sports in my life. One is rowing, one was hurdling and athletics. So I was a jumper and I just liked setting myself over things at reasonable speed. I wouldn't say high speed given that we're talking about Formula One, but had a bit of pace behind me when I was younger. And ballet was the third one, and I absolutely put that in the sporting category because it is probably the most athletic thing I ever did. And they very much, those 3 things ran my life for about 10 years. And it definitely brought out that competitive side of me, sometimes probably for the benefit of, competition, others perhaps not. But it's been an interesting one, and it's something that I absolutely love. Like I'll sit and watch anything, like whether it's, I don't know, golf, rugby, cycling, soccer, NFL, AFL, whatever. I just love sport. I love everything about sport in terms of what it teaches you, the camaraderie of teams, the resilience, people's stories. I find sport in Australia particularly interesting as well, because Australia, I would say, has this funny juxtaposition of being a really athletic sporting nation, and yet we don't invest in our athletes. And we have a very different attitude towards sport in comparison to places like the US. So you have a lot of incredibly talented athletes actually leaving Australia in order to go and be full-time athletes, which I think is a real shame in a lot of ways, because in their heart they'd love to be able to compete at home in a competitive way. So, yeah, that's a bit about my sporting background, and I just am a bit obsessed.
I look forward to seeing a Visit Victoria sponsorship for you as well, considering they seem to be the only brand willing to save athletes in this country at the moment. So 3 completely different types of sport, it has to be said. Yes, you weren't being hurdled over anything from a Formula One point of view, because George Russell wasn't next to you to bin you off and then jump you over a wall. So was there a point where any of those 3 you found yourself wondering about a future in them?
I still remember, I think it was actually at my 18th birthday party, my rowing coach, who is like 6'5", absolute unit, standing next to my 5'0" ballet teacher and my 80-year-old hurdles coach, all just standing looking at each other going, oh, you're why Freya's always late to training. Oh, you're why she showed up to ballet in a zoot suit the other day. And it's like, no, you can't wear your spikes in the dance hall. Like it was a bit of a funny one, because as much as they are all very different, they actually complemented each other incredibly well. So if you think about ballet, I know a lot of people think about, the grace and elegance and everything else that comes with that, which is completely true from a style perspective. But one of the most important things with ballet is also power. So really strong legs in order to jump really high. Guess where you get strong legs from? Rowing. And then from ballet, you have the flexibility and strength coming together, which is also really important for hurdles, but then also for rowing as well. So as much as they were totally different, they actually complemented each other incredibly well. I think ballet was something that I would say I have the passion for, but wasn't good enough at. Let's be clear, I've got my feet kind of crappy in the ballet world, so that was never going to be a thing. But it's probably one of the ones that I would say, if I was good enough, I had the passion for it, but I wasn't good enough and just wasn't built right. Hurdling, it's kind of like playing the trombone. Like you just, it's a sport that no one really thinks about a bit. And if you're really good, it's actually probably easier to be successful in it because fewer people do it, but there's also very few opportunities to kind of cross between different, I don't know, like it's just a bit of a funny thing to specialize in. For rowing, there was definitely a moment there where I thought maybe I could do something pretty cool here when it came to kind of your state and national level and kind of wanting to go there. But I'll be really honest, and by that stage I was completely burnt out. Like I got to year 12 or so, and I've been getting up since 4 o'clock my whole life, either to go to my siblings' trainings or to go to my own. And I was really tired. And so like again, I think I was probably good enough and I wanted to, but I was also just really tired. And I'd already been pretty exposed to the politics of the sport then as well. And I didn't love that side of it, which is the same in every sport. I don't think there's any sport that is immune to the politics that goes on. And I didn't love that, and it frustrated me as well. I think as someone who is so competitive, and you can only imagine what it's like at really elite levels, to feel like there is so much that's outside of your control in order for you to do well is just super frustrating, because it's not as simple as train hard, be the best and you get selected, or, train hard, get better and get on the team or whatever. Often that's actually just, they're not the only variables. Even in a sport where it's just about your physicality. You don't have a car where that's 70% of your performance. It's just how fast you can go, and I found that really frustrating side of sport. And I kind of turned to coaching at that point, which I found super fulfilling. Like I still rode off and on through uni, and loved that, and still rode when I was in the UK over at Cambridge City, and still really involved in it. And did get involved for a long time through coaching and then racing for university. But I love coaching, absolutely love it. I find it so fulfilling, watching the lessons be learned, the progress be made, challenges overcome, and everything else, especially with pretty young rowers. Like we start rowing in Tassie when we're about 12, as opposed to Melbourne in comparison. Like they don't usually start until about 15. And so you've got these, 12-year-olds out there in the absolute bloody freezing cold in Cornelian Bay, and they're kind of up to their knees and really hoping they don't fall out. But there's so many lessons that you learn in that moment and then kind of recover together and all of that stuff. And I was actually moving house a couple of years ago, and I found a ratchet spanner that one of my young teams had given to me, and that had it engraved, and with one of the little quotes that we used to, kind of motivational quotes we used to have before we send them out on the water. And it just made me realize how much I really did love it. And you can have such a massive impact on people as a coach. And obviously now I'm kind of turning that into my professional career as well from psych perspective. But I actually got sent an article from the school paper only from a couple of years ago, and it was the head girl of that year talking about her rowing coach when she was 13, who happened to be me. And this is someone whose name I can barely remember. Sorry, but was asked, what have been some of the big lessons that you've learned now you're finishing year 12, all of that stuff. And she started talking about a lot of what she learned through rowing, and you go, oh my goodness, like those moments have stuck with you as well. And I think there's something incredibly powerful in somebody who coaches well and is really invested in not just the success, but the development, the learning, and the individuals involved in sport.
Well, certainly interesting to know your opinions on certain things that go on in the world of Formula One, of course, and you bring a unique perspective, and that coaching element certainly is part of that. I won't talk about your professional career, but certainly from that side, I think it is really interesting. I guess from that point, those who can't talk about it. So hence the four of us talk about Formula One all the time. As I said before,
so everyone gets to talk about it because no one can do it.
No one can do it, not even Danny Rick. But from that point then as well for you, was sports journalism or broadcasting ever sort of in your field of interest? Because in the last 12 months, your podcasting career, I suppose, now we can call it that, has really accelerated beyond probably anything that you were expecting this time last year.
I didn't think about it, if I'm being totally honest. I was pretty set on a certain kind of track when I finished school and going and becoming a psychologist. And I didn't really, I was pretty blinkered, I would say, which I think is a lesson even for me and other people as well, kind of going, just really take it upon yourself to do research in terms of all the different options that are available to you, and think outside the square, because there's so many roles. It's not to say that obviously sports broadcasting and journalism and everything else existed. Of course it did. But not in the way that it does now. Like that is the type of work that has evolved so massively from when we were at school that, now you have all of these different avenues and access to people and different ways that you can bring stories to listeners and viewers and that type of thing, which for me I think is a lot more engaging. It was a lot about print media and that type of thing, and that wasn't something that particularly kind of hooked me, I suppose, the idea of writing about it. But bloody hell, I love to talk about it. So, but it wasn't really a thing then, right? So, I didn't really know that it's a thing that would exist, and I don't think it did exist in the way that it does now.
Yeah, podcasting. Well, I mean, there's plenty of podcasts out there, dear listener. Yeah. I know you know that. You listening to this one, you found it somehow, some way.
We're not the only one out there. Yeah.
No. There is a lot of crap out there, though. There is a lot of rubbish, including us. But at least we sound good most of the time, audio quality wise. The actual quality of the conversation might be something completely different. Let's talk about Formula One now, though, because we are on a Formula One podcast. Allegedly, it's Friday. What's your earliest memory of Formula One?
Well, I think anyone who listened to the very first podcast I did with you guys, which must have been the race preview Texas last year. So, we've just had our 1 year anniversary. So happy anniversary to Lakeside Drive from Freya. But my earliest memory would have been on my gap year, I think. If you don't know what a gap year is, find an Australian, they'll tell you about it. But we were actually in Monaco, and a bunch of the boys who were traveling with said, "Oh, we want to go find the hairpin." I was like, "What are you talking about?" And we went down there and we took the photos and that type of thing. And I was like, "So talk to me about Formula One," because motorsport was just not a thing in my world at all. We had Symonds Plains, which is a racetrack in Tasmania, which I only knew as the cross-country track because that's where I went to go and run. And I was like, why are there Bridgestone signs everywhere? Like, this is actually a track that we just come and convene at. It's a good place to run from. So that was my level of familiarity with motorsport. So my actual first moment, earliest memory with Formula One was standing on the hairpin in Monaco, which is kind of funny, I think, given that it's a place that a lot of people won't even get to go to. That was just a moment for me. But then it kind of came to life a bit more the following year in Melbourne when I moved there, and I heard the cars, and I'd been watching it a little bit the previous year, but I just hadn't quite registered what it would be like in person. And we were standing at uni in Melbourne and I could hear it. I'm like, what is that sound? So I was up in Parkville. Like, what is that? What is that noise? And everyone's like, it's Formula One's on this weekend. And I was like, okay, again, like talk to me some more about what it's like down at the track and that type of thing. So the first memory was actually in Monaco. Second one was really being hit with the noise firsthand. So of course, then we trotted down there and checked it all out.
Really, that time stamps when you went to university, because anything past 2014, you can't hear the cars when you stand right next to them anymore. But yeah, I can imagine it was incredible to sort of understand that. And certainly for a lot of Melburnians at the time, there's a lot of people now who watch Formula One as a result of that, not just Drive to Survive. Did you find yourself as interested in motorsports as other people were? So when your mates talking about, the chicane at Monaco and they really getting involved with it, was it when you started watching it, were you interested because of the competitive nature of the event, like rowing or watching rugby or anything else? Or was it more about the storylines that you started to discover that sort of brought your interest up?
No, very much the sport. And I think that's the same with me with all sports. It's always been about the sport. It's about the competition. And that's absolutely what drew me into it, partially because, what is so striking about Formula One is just how few people actually are able to achieve that as their career because, you have so few drivers. So that was really attractive to me as a spectator, being like, oh my God, these are absolutely the best of the best. You've got 100 million basketball players, you've got 20 Formula One drivers. And that was something that really kind of hooked me because you just go, this has to be something really special about these people. And how they think, their performance, their work with a team, and there's something very complex about it as a sport, which I also found just immediately interesting. I think there's other sports which are less exciting from that perspective, and there's so many variables involved, and I love that about it too. But no, very much about the sport and about the drivers insofar as I find it fascinating that that's what they do. You go, these are people who could probably go and be fighter jet pilots or something like that. You go, you're the competitive sporting version of that when you think about what you're risking and what you're doing. So I found not so much about a story perspective, but the personalities involved just because of the nature of the sport. I found that very intriguing as well.
Yeah, it's the fighter jet pilot comparison happens often until you know fighter jet pilots, and then you're like, no, nowhere close. Ask me how I know.
I have very few of those in my life, so I haven't had to be able to make the direct comparison.
So when did you start consuming a lot of Formula One content then? Because you heard the cars, you started going down, but it sort of, for a lot of people, it takes quite a while to start wanting to follow the season, especially in Australia because the time zone sucks so much. Yep. And often a lot of the content is behind the paywall of Fox Sports or KO.
Oh, absolutely. And I was a poor uni student, so there's no way I had any of that. So on that note, probably not until I kind of finished uni, partially because that just consumed my life. But what I did find, actually, and this is quite funny, because you'd be up studying at, stupid o'clock, that's when there was often a lot of activity happening, because obviously that's the time zone that it's happening in. So when I'm procrastinating, doing what I'm meant to be doing, I would find a lot of activity kind of happening there when it comes to, reports coming out about whoever was racing in, Spa or whatever. So I kind of started absorbing it. But again, the content just wasn't that accessible, honestly, especially if you didn't have subscriptions and everything else, and you only have one track a year that you can go to. So my first kind of real engagement with the race was working in catering, unfortunately. I have to say it's not a great vantage point, especially when you are a runner out the back. So I didn't really want to be front-facing hospitality. I was like, I just want to put my sneakers on. I don't want to have to put clothes on, pretty clothes on, and be all hospitality. I was like, I just want to put my sneakers on and carry boxes around and stuff and earn some cash. And so that was my first actual experience at a Formula One racetrack, was just working catering. Don't recommend it. Partially because you did go deaf then. So that must have been 2012, 2013. I was like, oh, great. My ears are ringing and I didn't say a thing. But you did still get a bit of a understanding as to what the vibe was like. But I would say probably after I'd finished uni, things started to become a little bit more accessible. People were doing different types of content, which allowed you to engage with it a bit more. And it started, although not then again for another couple of years, but just becoming a little bit more accessible. People were opening up a little bit more, whereas it really felt like everything was kind of super hush-hush, very exclusive. And after that, it kind of started becoming a little bit more, you're invited in a bit more, I suppose.
So then how do you feel about Drive to Survive changing that whole vibe?
So I think it's attracted a very different type of fan. I think there are some people who like sport and will watch that and go, okay, this is really cool, and they will be completely hooked on it. There'll be some people like that for sure, and maybe it's just not something they grew up with. They didn't really know what it was about. They just saw it as loud cars and that wasn't the thing that they were into, and that might have kind of shown them more, and that's now got them involved in the sport and they'll watch it forever, and that's awesome. I've noticed though as well, there's a lot of kind of 5-minute fans who got super obsessed with it, and already, and for once they found out that I was watching it, they would send me links, send me videos, send me all of his content. I'm like, that's great, you're engaging with all that stuff, and it's stopped now completely. So the longevity of those fans, just because of what the motivation is, I think, you kind of think about why you engage with a sport, why you watch it, why you follow the storylines, and do your research and all of that type of thing. It doesn't, that will come to the surface very, very quickly if you're only in it for the drama, I think. If there's nothing else beyond that, if it's not a love for sport, for technology, for engineering, whatever it might be, competition, that will come up pretty quickly. So I think it has been really good for the sport, for even existing fans as well, in terms of we just get to see more, we get to learn more, we get to hear different opinions, and you just get a lot more, get a lot more information from what was a previously kind of closed door. But I also think the flip side of that is that I don't know if the new fans that Netflix has created are going to be kind of long-term fans of the sport. And a side effect of that may be that the kind of more established fans who are there because they love it and have loved it for a long time, actually have almost a bit of a door closed on them because now, everything's more expensive. It's harder to get access, all of that type of thing. So I think there's been a bit of a perhaps unintended kind of collateral when it comes to the experience that people who love the sport for the sport are perhaps experiencing, because it's going to be even harder for them to get to races now, and that type of thing. So I think pros and cons.
Looking from a podcasting point of view, how's it changed how you watch Formula One?
I think I'm probably more aware of the kind of storylines than I would have been otherwise. It's not something that I'm particularly interested in, I'll say. I mean, it's interested in, maybe it's an overstatement. Of course, it's intriguing, right? When you hear about certain relationship changes or this person said that or whatever else. But so maybe I'm more aware of that than I used to be. So maybe my speculation has changed. I think I probably used to be a little bit more purist when it came to decisions that were made in the sport, or maybe another word for that is naive. So I don't know. But I would say I am probably more aware of a lot of the storylines and the people involved and that type of thing, which does perhaps change how I kind of assess different situations or decisions or outcomes. But I think it's really important that, for me anyway, and everyone's different, but for me, that can't be it, because that won't last. If you're only watching a sport because of one person or because of one, bit of drama that's come up, everything else, that just doesn't last. That's got nothing really to do with what is so phenomenal about this sport, which is, the technology, the teamwork. Every team has 1,000 people behind them, smaller or, bigger or smaller, just based on teams. But like it's a fascinating sport, far more beyond any type of kind of off-track drama. So, James, I was in the office the other day, and it turns out that the favourite TV show of all of my Irish, American, British and Filipino colleagues is the Australian Love at First Sight.
Oh,
and they're all obsessed with it.
Why? Yep.
And all of the other Australian reality TV shows. And the reason why they are able to access this absolute high quality gold television is because they are using a VPN and able to access content that is outside of the Caribbean, because let's be clear, we get very little locally made movies and reality TV, as might not surprise you. I don't know. But if you're missing out on your favourite show because you can't get it in your region, then you should download NordVPN. So perhaps you're bored with Married at First Sight US and you want to watch the Australian ones and get your Australian lingo up to speed with words like bogan.
I cannot get behind this. I can get behind NordVPN. Do that, absolutely. But if you're using it to get content like this, I have many, many questions as to what you're doing with your life.
Many questions. But one of the many, many questions that comes my way is, what is a bogan? And it's actually very hard to explain.
Yeah, it's a good
it's
point.
Just something that you have to come to Australia to see. But if you can't go all the way to Australia, just watch Married at First Sight using your NordVPN, and at the click of a button, you can do just that. You don't actually need to go to Australia, which is, as everybody knows, on the other side of the world to everywhere, even those places that are next door to it. And you can access it using your NordVPN. So using our discount at nordvpn.com, you can receive a huge discount on a 2-year plan, and of course you get that 1 free month as well. And if you're not a big fan of everybody knowing that Married at First Sight Australia is your favourite TV show, although no one seems to have a problem with that in our office, then you might want to keep that private, and that's important too. So NordVPN keeps all of your information encrypted, and you don't have to worry about your IP location getting out. So it's risk-free. You've got your 30-day money-back guarantee. So no risk that if you want to watch Married at First Sight and then it turns out that's not your thing, Desperate Housewives, just like Campy, that's your favourite TV show and you want that locally, then it's a money-back guarantee. So give it a try, and if you like it, that's great. And if you don't, well, then they'll give you a refund because they're bloody legends like that. So give it a go and have a look via our link in the bio.
What's been your experience, or what's it been like to have feedback from podcasting when people either feed it back directly to you in person or online, or you meet people that you've never met before?
Well, most of the feedback that I've got has been about Campy, so it hasn't been that useful a lot of the time.
Yep.
But everything I do in every other part of my life always has had a big part of feedback, has always been a big part of it. So that's not something I find particularly, I don't know, it doesn't weigh on me. If you go back to sport, for example, you do a set, you stop and someone goes, right, next time you need to do this better. You nailed that though. Okay, so it's something you're doing well, it's something you need to keep working on. And that will be a whole session. It was the same with ballet, it was the same with hurdling. And I think when you've had that as part of everything you do, hearing it then of someone else saying, oh, you could have helped to steer the conversation better, or you could have asked this question, or you accidentally cut off, it sounded like you accidentally kind of cut off the interviewee or your subject and that type of thing. Okay, yep, noted, how can I not do that next time? Or I think the more important thing when it comes to this type of thing is acknowledging the things that you are doing well, because a lot of the things that you won't see as strengths, and this goes for everybody, the things that you won't see as strengths because it's just your natural style or how you go about things, other people will say, that's actually really amazing that you're able to hold a conversation for hours when all you can hear is Campy's breathing. Like, great work. So the things that you won't necessarily see as your own strengths, other people will see as, actual real achievements. So it's important to be aware of those too.
What's been your favourite podcasting moment this year?
Probably on the McLaren Applied podcast, where we hosted the panel discussion, which was with 4 women working in at McLaren Applied. And there was a moment with one of the women on that panel who had come in with quite a bit of kind of prepped material and stuff, which is very normal. You're going into an interview, you want to make sure you're ready and all of that type of thing. But it was feeling a little bit scripted, and I kind of just went off script for a second and just asked a few questions that were based on a story that she was telling, and all of a sudden she just came to life. And that to me was a real learning as a host, but then also what makes really good content, because we were able to see in that moment the shift in energy, that change in energy in the person who you're interviewing or speaking to, and also how people responded to that, because we almost had, because it was a panel, you almost have a bit of an immediate feedback loop, right? Because you've got people around you who are either laughing or engaging or they're falling asleep or whatever. And when she started telling this story, which she wasn't planning to, but it was very off the cuff and it was clearly something that meant a lot to her, all of a sudden the response changed. So that was a really interesting moment and something that, you kind of take a lot away from, even though it wasn't it's not a high profile person or anything like that, but it was an important moment. Just
before we wrap this segment up, before I hand control back to you, where else do you get your F1 content from?
Yeah, I am a big fan of racer.com just because I find that anything that is still speculation, they're very open about the fact that it is still speculation. They don't print things that as though they're gospel when they're not, which we see on other sites. So is it Racing News 365? Sometimes I have a scan at that and I was like, That hasn't been confirmed yet, but you're talking about it as though it has. And there's a couple of other sites I find just to be a bit overly confident in their reporting. So I do like racer.com. I'll often just go to the actual F1 website. Who would have thought? But then a lot of the associate kind of businesses as well, or organisations. So whether that's Girls on Track UK or Pirelli or whoever, like other associated either suppliers or organisations, there's actually often a lot of content or news or interviews or whatever that they're hosting as well. So they're probably my kind of, Racer and F1 are my two main sources, and then after that it's other interviews and people doing this type of thing.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good place to end. Thank you so much for being on your own podcast. And now back to you.
Well, good work with the prep on that one. As it does, just talking about hosting a podcast and be like, oh yeah, you want to go in prepared. Just having a bit of a chuckle about that for this one. But
I don't need preparation.
Who needs prep? I know that that's not your style. So actually, I think that you should be more at home, having had no prep time at all.
That's true.
But other things we just wanted to chat about this week. So talking about where you get your content from, there was an interview released with Go Tifi with Tom Clarkson, and I found this quite interesting, just in the way that he talks about his career and his competitors and that type of thing. I have to say I don't get a lot of like Latifi content. Because there's not a lot of it, and it's not necessarily, he's not someone who I am a huge supporter of necessarily. So I tend not to see that much of it. But this is actually a really good interview, and something which I really liked about it was that he just communicates in such a respectful way. And I know we talk about that with him in terms of going, he's the nicest guy on the grid and everything else, but there's an element I'd say that he actually gets a bit frustrated by with that, in there going, well, I'm actually just as competitive as everybody else here. But he does communicate in such a respectful way. He's so he recognises the kind of the privileged position that he's been in, and that for the last 3 years he has lived what would be a dream for most people. People who are karting going, I want to be a Formula One driver. He's like, I've been living the dream for 3 years, and that's actually a massive privilege. And he acknowledges that, which I think is great. There's no sense of entitlement there, which will be so easy to have for somebody who's in his position. But he did say, there's been a bit of a shift in feelings kind of towards everything, not just the sport or fans or whatever, but just a big shift in feelings towards everything just based on the last year. And he said, it's very hard to, every race weekend go into a weekend knowing that I could knock it out of the park. I could give my best performance I ever have, and we probably still won't get a result that is befitting of the effort that goes into it with the team and the people back at the factory, which again, I think he said, that just then makes motivation really, really difficult. You've got to dig deep when you know that you're never competing for a podium, which I thought was just interesting to hear him say.
Yeah, and I think this year especially, probably the last 2 years, but this year especially, F1 Twitter has just been the most toxic place full of idiots who have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, but they love ganging up on people. They love really, really having a go. And Latifi is often in their sights, which is just, it is what it is. I guess you're part of a driver and you're going to get criticism, but it feels different this year. And I think also the way that people talk about Formula One, one of the reasons why some people have dropped off, as you said in that brilliant interview segment that was just done earlier, that people have the sort of maybe 5-minute fans have dropped out, but the toxic element of that has stayed. Those who feel like they know enough to be able to share stuff around. And so I think for this kind of phase of where we're at with not only just Drive to Survive fans, but everyone, it's very easy to get on board someone and completely destroy them for no reason. Now, Campy's been doing that since 2019 to Pierre Gasly. Different story. Because I think if Pierre Gasly met Campy, in fact, I would love to arrange that. If I end up working somehow in the paddock in Formula One, I need to get a little video directly to Campy from Pierre Gasly, just absolutely putting himself in the bin. But anyway, it's just interesting because I think Latifi is an incredibly lovely dude. A lot of these drivers, aren't all that talkable and not that chatty when it comes to feeling how they feel. I want to open up about it, but I feel like he does. And it's unfortunate because the car's not being developed in the direction that he wants it to be developed in, because why would you? Because he's leaving exactly the same as DR with McLaren. There's no point. And sometimes you just have to accept that, and it must be so hard to do, though.
And there's a few things you mentioned there, which I think are good to talk about. One of which is the aftermath of last year, at the end of last year, and he actually answered that question really well in terms of saying what was the impact of that on you, where he just said, look, it just shows the ugly side of social media, and this isn't actually about me or about sport.
Yeah.
It's about social media. It's the same for anybody else who's in the limelight. And he said, it was good that the season was done. I didn't have to show up in the paddock next week and ask questions about it and that type of thing. But he goes, this isn't about me. It's not even about Formula One. It's about social media. And anybody who has any type of attention is suddenly, a free-for-all when it comes to horrific behaviour. And if you think about the situation that he has been in, both in that situation and then his general kind of performance this year and the last couple of years, I don't want to say right, but you have so many choices in how you behave or respond to situations, and the only thing you control is your own behaviour. At no point has he bad-mouthed other people, blamed his team, boycotted interviews or anything like that. All he's done is go in and say, I'm trying to figure it out. I'm doing my best. It's a really frustrating weekend, everything else. So he's just been completely respectful to everybody else who's involved, because like I said, there's a whole other 1,000 people behind him as well and he's just the one who has to kind of front up to the media. But he said, people do see me as the nice guy, but I'm just as competitive as the rest of them, and it's really hard to come to terms with the fact that you can't win, you can barely compete. So where are you meant to draw your motivation from? You have to dig pretty deep for that. And he's very open about, Russell and Albon in terms of saying, look, they're better, and that is what it is. He said, there's elements of that which are helping them insofar as he goes, Alex is he's much more comfortable with an unstable car. He said, I really like to brake late. I kind of create my own front end in doing that, and it's at the expense of exit speed, but I try and find a balance with that. But the way we've developed this car, the second you have that combination of braking and steering, I'd lock up. But then the next time I do it, it doesn't happen. And he goes, the instability in the car and then the unpredictable nature of it, he goes, I really have not been able to come to terms with that, come to grips with it. And he goes, to be fair, Albon has. And maybe his ability to do that has exposed my weakness, which is the fact that this is how I like the car. And, he's been more adaptable with that. And he said he didn't feel like the gap was as big with Russell and their performance in comparison to Albon. But he kind of said, but this year the car took an extra step away from my driving style. And so to your point, said, it's been really hard just to watch it go further and further in the opposite direction, because how am I meant to work with that in a lot of ways? And he'll say, it's not all about the car, but it is also all about the car in a lot of ways too. So he said, you've just got to keep working at it, and a lot of it seems to come from the respect of just getting to race in Formula One, and the fact that, like I said, he's living everybody else's dream in a lot of ways. And he said, tried not to let last year and the kind of behaviour that he was subject to knock his confidence for this year. And he said that it didn't. But what did happen was, qualifying in Australia, Bahrain earlier in the year. He said, it's hard to get momentum when things like that happen so early in the season. That he's like, that knocked my confidence though, like my own performance did. So he's just incredibly self-aware, which was very impressive to hear.
Yeah, I can't wait to listen to that interview. I haven't yet listened to that one with Tom, but I can only imagine it's going to be a good one. Let's hope that he can find himself in a competitive IndyCar next year or NASCAR.
Yeah.
Although I imagine NASCAR now, everyone is just going to drive against the wall for the entire time, because that shit was the best motorsport I've ever seen. Anything else? There's nothing better. There's nothing better in Formula One. Don't even pretend like you're going to say, Senna and Prost, nah, in the bin. Nothing compared to that move that was done. If you haven't seen it yet, go to NASCAR, their social media platforms, and you will see heaps of it. Heaps and heaps and heaps of it. It was bloody outstanding.
Or go to anybody else's platform and you'll see it. But I don't think there's anyone who's not obsessed with it. It's everywhere and it's phenomenal. It's absolute hero business. It's so, oh my goodness. You can't imagine just the type of steel you would have to have inside you to pull that type of move. Like, it must have been terrifying. Not to mention just like also quite innovative and like probably a bit unnecessary, but at the same time, incredible.
Well, you know what happened? He read and then, he's seen heaps of social media recently and he's gone, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to fuck around and I'm going to find out.
It's so good. The best part, actually, I think the best part of it is listening to the live reactions of people who are like in the stands there. They're like just going absolutely mental, like, whoa, like, you see this guy? Like, so this is amazing. They're like, just can't believe what they're witnessing. It's beautiful. One last thing I was going to say on Latifi, because you mentioned Daniel Ricciardo, is that he has a lot of empathy for everything he's hearing there. He goes, look, I can't put myself in Daniel's Ricciardo's shoes to tell you how he's feeling. But he goes, I understand completely. When he says he comes in and he looks at the data and then this is how the car behaves and then it's different next time and then it's not how you like to drive and all of his stuff, he's like, I just get it completely. He goes, I have a very strong sense as to what he's going through, and just really feel for him, because I feel like I'm going through the same thing, which I thought was interesting. It's also because social media is so crap, you have these people going, oh no, Ricciardo's washed. And I was like, well, actually, you've got two drivers there who are both saying that they cannot come to grips with their car and they can't figure out what it is a lot of the time, and there's only so much you can do about it. So it's not something that is unique to him either. So again, maybe those two should go have a beer one day and figure it out.
Yeah, I think, plenty of people can say someone's washed without ever driving a Formula One car. I think one of the things that is incredibly important is to listen to other people who have done it. And there is no one in the paddock except for one Canadian dickhead who drove a Formula One car over 3 decades ago, saying anything that is anywhere kind of remotely around Danny is washed or any of it. So I think when the current drivers on the grid are saying it's a shame for Daniel, like we really hope he stays, like everyone has said that. Not only because he is obviously a really big part of the sport from a Netflix point of view and character point of view, but also because they've all probably, except really for Lando and maybe Joe, have been able to bounce around different teams and try to understand and get on top of a car that isn't quite right and makes it makes it very hard to drive. Carlos Sainz is a similar example to Daniel. I mean, he managed to get on top of that McLaren better than Daniel did, but it would have been interesting to see if Daniel in that same era McLaren would have done similarly before Carlos then departed, or if Carlos would have struggled the following year. I mean, you can't, it's all speculation, isn't it? But it's just interesting, I think, at that point.
Oh, totally. No, I completely agree. Like you said, it'd be interesting. Like, and another good question of that, which I would completely understand, is Tom kind of says, would you just love to get into a Red Bull and just see what you can do in it? He's like, I want to get into any car that I can be in the mid-pack or higher in, quite frankly. Doesn't even have to be a Red Bull. I just want to be able to properly compete in the mid-pack every weekend. But I feel like that about Daniel Ricciardo and a few other drivers as well, to be honest, where I really want to know what their actual potential is, because so much of it is in the car. And we see that in so many examples when we especially when you get those kind of straight line speed overtakes, there's just no way that this, it's got nothing to do with that person. The car is just so much faster in certain circumstances in particular. But I would love to see not just Daniel Ricciardo, other epic drivers like Pierre Gasly in the current Red Bull car, or whichever, even a Ferrari, and so what can you actually do with this? Because I think there's a lot of drivers who will never see their full potential because they don't have the machinery underneath them.
Yep.
part of the sport is what it is. Other news this week was the F2 and F3 calendars have been released. So some logic prevails with the FIA, which is that they will keep racing alongside Formula One, which is great. That was a really good change that they had made. It just made complete sense to do that. And there'll be a couple of changes. So Australia is getting added. So F2 and F3 have not raced in Australia before, so they will get to do that as a street track, which is awesome, to have them come over and race in Melbourne. There'll be 14 rounds for F2 and F3 will go from 9 to 10 because they will also go to Monaco, which they haven't done before. So really interesting to see how those drivers kind of take on that challenge because it's very different to every other track, both in terms of qualifying and then the race. So I'm sure that will be something that they're excited to see.
Cars are the right size for that track, F3 cars, so the racing will actually be pretty good. In fact, that'll be the one to watch on a Monaco Grand Prix weekend, is to get out there for the junior categories, not necessarily for the main event.
Yeah. Oh, it would be great. Like I said, they're much more appropriate for the width of the track in comparison to our current generation of F1 cars. So, but it's just, I think as a driver, they will just be, they'd be so excited to finally get to race that track properly because it's something that you do. You hear from all of them kind of say it's the one that you want to race at, it's the one that you want to win. So they'll be glad to be starting to get that experience a bit earlier on, I'm sure. But that's it for this week. Don't forget that you can support the show by either subscribing to our YouTube channel, grabbing some merchandise, or jumping onto our Patreon link via the description below. Or of course, you can get a NordVPN subscription as well. James, you're definitely not coming next time. But thanks for asking me some really cool questions.
You're welcome. And do what you want, listener. Don't subscribe. Don't do it. I don't believe you do it.
Don't do it.
I'm not interested.
But do it.
I don't want to do it. No, I don't want to do content next year. That's fine.
Do it, but don't do it.
Pull the plug out.
And if you want to do it, don't do it, but do it.
All right. Good God. What was that? All right. See us out.
I don't know. I don't know. This is what happens when you give me free reign. I just talk absolute garbage.